I'm an ape.
Yeah.
Are you, Bishop?
I'm not.
Yeah.
Definitely I'm not.
Well, I'm an ape. I'm an African ape. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud to be an African ape.
Yeah.
And so should you.
I wonder what the Dawk Dynasty will be. Richard Dawkins' dynasty, that is. Because unfortunately, he's like, oh, so many scientists who do a good enough job within their field, and that's the key statement, but then they are so zealous for their atheist worldviews that they utterly discredit themselves, at least in the eyes of the thinking public, the logical public, the public who won't conclude that since they're good at a very specified, narrow field of research in science, that they will do likewise just as well within the realm of logic or philosophy or history or all these areas in which they attempt to get involved. Lawrence Krauss, Stephen Hawking, Carl Sagan, P.Z. Myers, Richard Dawkins. I mean, it's so many more. It's too bad. They really could have made many contributions to our scientific progress. And instead, they use and abuse and misuse science as a soapbox from which to proclaim their atheist worldviews. Now there's going to be a new movie come out about Stephen Hawking. And many, many people will be turned on to Stephen Hawking now. Either renewed or anew or what have you. But unfortunately, I would wonder they won't be turned on to Stephen Hawking the scientist. They'll be turned on to Stephen Hawking the activist atheist. Okay, so that's another shameful in a too bad sort of way, like that's a shame. It's really too bad that such a talented cosmologist would literally be wasting his time. I mean, literally wasting good time, money, and God-given talent to just concoct template after template, model after model of the universe, not in order to find out how the universe actually functions and how it actually came to be, but to attempt to disprove God, that God is merely superfluous. It's really too bad. It's a shame. Think of all the scientists down through the years. Think of all of those who think that their job is to defend evolution, for instance. Just wasted time, literal wasted time, wasted grants, wasted talent, wasted money, wasted energy. Just such a shame. Now, one interesting aspect about the Dawk Dynasty is that, for instance, Richard Dawkins published many peer-reviewed science journal papers about biology. Of course, knowing him, they were all most likely just about his faith-based belief in evolution, but granted. Then he just decided to become a militant activist atheist, and it's all gone downhill from there. Take, for example, his book, The God Delusion. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure it sits on many 15-year-olds' bookshelves. You know? Not surprisingly, he has made a specialization of targeting the youth because he knows that teenagers, they're naturally rebellious as it is. They're ready to just tell mommy and daddy, oh yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm 15 now, and I got it all figured out. Not coincidentally, at the age of 16 is when Richard Dawkins finally solidified his firm faith-based belief in evolution and decided that God was simply unnecessary. Started having doubts at the age of 8 or 9. So think about that. How much reasoning, logic, intellect, and science and philosophy did he really bring into that decision? That which can be mustered by an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and one that can be mustered by the rebellious nature of a teenager, ready to cut mommy's apron strings, ready to just dive headlong into the world with all the unethical behavior it has to offer. But the God Delusion is not exactly praised as some kind of academic or scholarly text. Quite the opposite, actually. There are many intellectual atheists who consider it an embarrassment. And now, Dawkins started with high hopes for this book. In the preface to the book, he wrote, "If this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down." So look at that. That's just astonishing. And by the way, Dawkins, sorry, but I went all the way through it, and actually, I agree with your fellow atheists who are embarrassed by it. It really, truly is an embarrassment. For one, if you just remove the anecdotes from it, you're left with nothing much more than a leaflet. And when, for the universe's beginning, you appeal to literal luck, I mean, that's just scratching the surface. The fact that you besmirch Judeo-Christianity at every possible turn, because of course atheism is primarily an anti-Christian support group, and then when it comes to the point where you are able to do the same about Islam, you simply sidestep it in your book, saying that some of their more militant doings are just too painful to recount. So then you left them aside. Nothing more to say. How quaint. Yes, because you sit in the UK and the USA, countries premised upon Christian principles. You sit in their safety and their comfort and their lucrativeness and besmirch Judeo-Christianity all day long. But you wouldn't dare go to a Muslim country and do lectures and interviews and write books about besmirching Allah, Islam, or Muhammad, would you? You wouldn't dare. That's right. So then, once obviously Dawkins saw that his book was nothing more than just a bunch of emotive fluff, he decided to state that, well, his book is just amusing. And he also stated that it was a funny book. Okay, so that's Dawkins, his own downfall, noted by Dawkins himself, the Dawk Dynasty. From a book that would convert religious people just by reading it, to a book that was just amusing or funny. For example, he told Lisa Miller of Newsweek in 2009 AD, "I suppose the most strident passage in the God Delusion is where I talk about the God of the Old Testament as the most unpleasant character in all fiction." Note, by the way, that's right, the God of the Old Testament, not the God of the Quran or any other. And the quote continues, "I had this long list of adjectives, homophobic, infanticidal." That's kind of using long words, long Latinate words to describe what everybody actually knows, that the God of the Old Testament is a monster. I put it in this rather, I'd like to think, amusing way. Oh, that is just so funny, isn't it? Oh, it's hilarious. It's hilarious to look at the overwhelming majority of the entire planet's population and tell them their God is a monster. And by the way, upon what premise did he do so? Zero. He's just a typical fire brimstone atheist preacher. He just goes right into condemnation without providing a premise upon which to condemn. And he continues, "Well, in that particular passage, I'm only talking about the God of the Old Testament. So the only people who will be offended are the people who believe in the God of the Old Testament." Now, of course, that's utterly false. Because people who aren't like you, who aren't militant, they would be offended as well that you're treating people that way. Right? I mean, if you condemn the God of the Quran I would agree with that condemnation because I have a premise upon which to condemn it. But I would also come along Muslims and say, you know, we should be offended, not that people such as Dawkins are allowed to speak out, but that of the preposterous, baseless, unfounded things they say. And then he continued, if they actually read the Old Testament, they could not fail to agree with what I said. Well, Dawkins, I'm really sorry to have to, actually I'm not in the least bit sorry, to have to inform you that the overwhelming majority of the entire planet's population has read it, and they most certainly disagree. And then he concludes, the God of the Old Testament is a monster, and it's very, very hard for anyone to deny that. He is like a hyped up Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, this goes to show many things, including that it is impossible to live an atheist worldview in the real world, to live it out, to actually base your actions and logic upon your atheist worldview. Because if he really believed that which he believed, then Dawkins would conclude that 1, the God of the Old Testament merely survived as the fittest God meme. 2, the moral zeitgeist is such that way back then those actions were not immoral. And 3, in an atheistic universe, there is no such transcendent, ultimate, or binding ethos, so that there's no way he can condemn it, except to say that he has personally decided not to like it. And of course, that's just nice. That's meaningless. And that would merely be an expression of his interpretation of the biochemical neural reactions occurring within the gray matter of a haphazardly evolved brain within the skull of a bioorganism who is temporarily existing as it sits atop a spinning rock in the universe's backwater, rotating around an average star. Period. But that would be too consistent with his worldview, so he has to borrow from the Judeo-Christian worldview in order to condemn the worldview. And since he's doing that, he actually accredits the Judeo-Christian worldview. So there's the Dawk Dynasty, his magnum opus, The God Delusion, a book that would convert religious people to atheists, but a book that he ends up just referring to as being amusing and funny.
I think The God Delusion is actually rather a funny book. It's intended to be funny, and I think we get a lot of laughs when Lala Ward, my wife, and I do public readings of it. We get a lot of laughs, and many of the laughs come from the bits that are often described as strident and shrill. It's not a strident and shrill book. It's a humorous book.
So there isn't a process, as it were, going on in the cell saying, look, be patient.
No.
It's going to be a feather, believe me.
Yes. It doesn't happen like that. There's got to be a series of advantages all the way in the feather. If you can't think of one, then that's your problem, not natural selection's problem. Natural selection, well, I suppose that is a sort of matter of faith on my part, since the theory is so coherent and so powerful. I'm very proud to be an African ape.
We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people.
I'm very proud to be an African ape.
And just really brainwash people.
I'm very proud to be an African ape.
And just really brainwash people.
Sort of matter of faith. Sort of matter of faith. Sort of matter of faith.